I think some of it had to do with the true history of the world, that kind of thing, and I will be going over a lot of that tonight. I also want to emphasize that a lot of what I'm going to tell you is very different than what you may have already heard. Even those of you who have been with me before and have attended some of the seminars or seen some of the tapes, I'm going to be speaking a lot differently tonight, adding a lot of different information that I never thought I could add in public, but it's pertinent to what I'm going to tell you. Also, some of you might be offended by some of the things that I say tonight because it goes into the heart of the fabric of American civilization and of Western society and of all society. And those of you who are very much deeply involved in conventional society may not understand what I'm saying or may even be slightly insulted by it, and I understand that because some of the information is very opposite to what you learned or think you've known all of your lives, but particularly in the last 30 to 35 years, and especially as it relates to religious matters and political matters. I'm going to tell you what I know and what I experienced personally. Those of you who've been with me before know that for over 25 years I worked in the government, and I was involved in the Montauk Project from 1970 to 1983, which involved mind control and genetic manipulation and even such topics as bizarre as time travel and interstellar weaponry. All of these things are true and really occur on this planet and elsewhere, and most of the population doesn't know anything about it. But what I want to begin with tonight is a story that I lived through for the last 2 years that touched me very personally and nearly destroyed my entire life. And it involved a person whom I met in Orlando, Florida. And this woman attended my very first seminar in Orlando. And in fact, her name was the first one on the list of guests because last name started with an A. And I was working at that time with an East Indian person who was doing my sponsoring work in the Orlando area. And he had been a client of mine and then asked if I'd be willing to do seminars in that area. And he, in turn, was networking with this woman who was a friend of his. And she claimed that she was the one who got a lot of the people to attend that seminar. And there was quite a few people at that seminar, which was actually held at a Catholic seminary called San Pedro, just outside of Orlando. Now, that was the first time I ever met her. That very first day, she kind of latched onto me. Told me stories about how she was a Cherokee and Blackfoot Indian, as well as having Irish genetics as well, and that she was very much aware of what was going on with the world situation and who was controlling the world. And that very first time I met her, there was a recognition. I remembered something about her from the past. And a lot of it had to do with the Montauk Project. Montauk Project used women specifically for breeding purposes and for controlling purposes. Very often, they would have programmed males under the jurisdiction of a very aggressive female who would be their handler or controller. The second time I came to Orlando, 3 months later, she became much more aggressive in her connection to me. And in fact, she had been calling me on the telephone on and off for those past couple of months. And she would say words and say things that triggered information in my own head. Things which I never knew that I even could remember, that involved ritual ceremony and what I have come to know as reptilian religious programming, which is something I'll get into a little bit later. To make a long story short, she managed to take over the control of the Orlando seminars and all of the Florida programs that I handled there. She took them over from this East Indian person, and she became quite attached to me. She told me that she knew that there was a crop of programmed people out there, that I was one of, who were being prepared for a certain position in the global order. She also told me that she was very proud of her reptilian heritage, and that she had killed people and murdered people to get to where she was at this present time. Now, a normal person would have reacted a little differently than I did. A normal person would have said, what kind of woman is this who admits to being a killer and controlling people and knowing secret information, and this person's latching on to me? And yet I didn't do anything about it, and yet I encouraged her to continue doing my programming for me and sponsoring me and promoting me. It wasn't until January of this year that she became blatantly aggressive, to the point where she completely took over my business, where she took away work from my wife Janet, who was handling my work at that time, and actually got me to the position where I was totally removed and isolated from my family. She had me, and I helped with this, by the way, so I take responsibility. She had me traveling to all the continents of the earth under her jurisdiction, traveling to Illuminati sites and activities where severe ritual and ceremony had taken place where I was concerned, knowing that at those places I would become activated and certain memories would come to the surface. During this time, she also drugged me. I have 18 needle holes in my back. I didn't know I was being drugged at the time. She would also slip pills into my mouth at night while I was semi-conscious. She also carried a weapon with her that was loaded at all times. She threatened to kill my wife, my family, and my children, and told me that I had to do everything that she wanted me to do, otherwise I would also be eliminated. Part of me, an underlying part of me, kept saying, I need to get out of here. I need to be removed from this person. But a surface part of me went along with it. It was almost as if I was a prisoner within my own mind. And there was programming techniques that she would do which were part of what a handler would do to people. For example, she would keep the room very hot, then she would keep it very cold. She would give me a lot of food, then she would give me no food. Deprivation and the antithesis of deprivation. That's a programming technique. Drugging someone, sleep deprivation, food deprivation, saying keywords, memories, etc. She had me going to Montauk Point, actually talking to the security guards and letting us get into the property, taking me to the building where I had been kept, activating certain sequences, then had a security guard make sure that we got out safely through a back exit. She introduced me to people. I did a lot of work in California, introduced me to people in California who are closely connected to Hollywood and closely connected to political organizations. She would have me meet other people who were involved in the same programming as I am. I can't mention their names here in public because I don't think they would appreciate it, but you've heard of all of them. Some of them are very well-known authors and public figures. Also involved in blood ritual and reptilian ceremony. She had me meet, and I can mention this person's name, a woman by the name of Arizona Wilder. You may have read about her in some of David Icke's books. She was a programmed sex slave along the lines of Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor. Arizona Wilder remembered me, and I remembered her. She was called the mother goddess in the reptilian ceremony. She had a very high position, one in which there was ritualistic killing of infants, animals, and adults. And she remembered me being in positions like that at Montauk and in other areas of the world. One of the places that I was sent to was Buenos Aires. And in the palace of Evita Peron, on the basement of this area, there is a vast chamber where these ceremonies take place. A symbol of some of these ceremonies is a winged lion. And if you go to the Congress building of Argentina, the entire building is ringed with gold winged lions. She also had me go, and we already traveled throughout Europe, Switzerland, Germany, Norway, Sweden. In every place, she destroyed my business. Where she told me she was going to promote me and change things, she eliminated things and cut people off. We wound up at a concentration camp in East Germany. Very strange things going on there. We walked into the room that was given to us. There were still bloodstains on the floor and on the walls. The light would go on and off. She would speak to the light and it would stop. She knew information about me that I never told anybody ever. The only way she could have known this information is if it were given to her. Yes?
I'm sorry, is this she being Arizona Wilder?
No, this other woman. Yeah. Arizona Wilder was someone that I was introduced to with this woman. She also got me to the point where I truly believed that I would be selected for this role that she said I was going to play in the New World Order. She told me that I was a member of the Illuminati and that my genetics were chosen for that purpose. She also took me to an astrologer in Palm Desert, California, an astrologer who's very well known to Hollywood people and to other people in that area. She used a false birth date. When the astrologer, of course, she had that on her driver's license and used it officially. But when she ran that birth date through the astrologer's computer and ran my birth date through the astrologer's computer, it came out that she was my exact opposite, as if she was my balance. The only way that could possibly be true is if it was already figured out way in advance of her getting these identifications. She also ran what I would call halfway houses in the Orlando area for people who came out of prison, prostitutes, drug addicts, alcoholics, deep criminals, people who she housed and took care of, but yet would not take any state funding or federal funding. She had her own rules, her own regulations. She knew all the police officers. She knew all the judges. She knew all legal aspects of what she was doing, and she would never let anyone know what was going on in her business. She told me that she was closing her business to take over my business, and that I had an obligation to her. And to make a long story short, she even told me that she was pregnant with my children. She said that she miscarried my twins and showed me the fetuses. It was quite a horrific experience. Of course, at the time, my wife knew nothing about that part of the relationship. Finally, we wound up in Anchorage, Alaska. She had the phones cut off. I could not communicate with my family. She would not let any phone calls through. She told my wife that I was divorcing her and marrying her, and that at that point, she told me if I go back to my children and to my family, she'd make sure that they were all killed. This is what I was living with for the last 6 months, mostly over the last 2 years, but particularly the last 6 months. Couldn't tell anybody about it, couldn't speak about it in public. The one thing that really hooked me into her, that made me think and believe that she was telling me the truth about everything, was a particular item that I never spoke about to anybody, and that is the beings who created the reptilians. Those of you who have been with me before know that when I do my DNA seminar, the second day of the first grouping of seminars, and I talk about galactic history, I talk about how the reptilians were the first colonists on this earth and how they destroyed human civilizations elsewhere. I also mentioned to all of you that nobody knew who created them, but it was believed they were not natural to this time-space continuum. Well, when I was a child, there used to be these beings that would come into my bedroom, and I used to call them the clear people. They looked almost like a human form. They were about 6 feet tall, but you could see through them. You could see the veins and the arteries and what looked like organs, but not human organs. They had no face, really, just an empty spot surrounded by this clear membrane. And they would walk and move like a person. One evening, my sister happened to be looking out of her bedroom door, because her door faced the hallway where we used to sleep as a children, and saw my bedroom door, and she saw one of these beings walking out of my room and then evaporating in the hallway. It was just after an incident that I had waking up and seeing that creature standing over me. And they used to program me or talk to me, where I would get up in the middle of the night, go to my closet door and open it, and there they would be standing there. And if I entered into that space, it was like entering into another dimension, filled with them. They were like gelatinous beings, and I call them clear people. Never spoke about this to a living soul. Not my wife, not my family, only my sister, because she said, I saw a strange thing last night, and I said, that's funny, I had a dream about that. And that was as far as it went. And yet when I met this woman, a year and a half after meeting her, she started talking to me about the clear people, or the transparent people. And it just boggled my mind to think that she knew about such things. That was a very deep secret that I knew I was never supposed to talk about. These are the creatures, the beings, who genetically created the reptilian races. This is the first time I've ever mentioned this ever in public. And the reason that I'm doing this tonight, especially because it's being taped, is because I want a record of what I'm saying to you on tape and on audio, in case something does happen to me, or in case something does come up in the future where she does something, at least all of you know, and it's on tape what I'm telling you and the date that it was recorded. And I'm going to get more into these transparent people in a little bit. But I want to tell all of you that I myself, despite my abilities, despite what I know, was deceived and allowed this to happen to me. And so it took a great effort for me to even be able to say all of this in public to all of you and to have it taped. When I left Anchorage, Alaska, I was going to go back to Orlando with this woman. She told me that she wanted me to go straight back to Orlando with her. In the meantime, she had set up a bank account in Anchorage under her first name and my last name as if we were married. She also had me go to the Motor Vehicle Bureau to apply for an Alaska driver's license. She was going to have me completely dissociated from my family and from everywhere that I lived. On the way back, I told her I had to see my children one last time. And she told me questions that she said, your family will try to get you back. They will try to make you not come back with me. And she would question me to see how I'm going to answer. And I gave her all the right answers. Thank God, something within me started changing. And I was afraid to go home. I thought, what will they do to me when I get there? What will I say? I'd been home in weeks. She went to Orlando, and I took a taxi back home. And I stayed outside for quite a while because I was afraid to go inside. But I finally walked in the door, and when I did, it was like coming out of a coma. That's the only way I can explain it. It was like walking out of one heavy, dense environment and walking into something that was open and clear, and I could breathe. And I remember walking into my hallway and then walking into the living room, and then my wife came down and the children came down, and it was like I had been sleeping a very long time and I just woke up. And I had this weird dream. And it was a very strange sensation. And it took from that time, which was just last month, the middle of July, all the way till now, for me to really start coming back to myself and remembering everything that just happened to me in the last 2 years, and especially the last 6 months. I had traveled over 160,000 miles. I had gone to I don't know how many countries. I think I passed through 49 states, all getting away from my family being segregated for this job that she claimed that they had for me. And then the interesting or bizarre thing, of course everything I'm telling you must be bizarre to all of you, but I saw this woman shift in front of my eyes. I know many of you have heard about shape-shifting people, those who can change from one form to another. But I saw her shift from a human-type person into a reptilian, this far from my face. I also saw her shift into what looked like a very cat-like creature. And on one occasion, I saw her shift into what I can only describe as a hag, an old hag, like an old witch type person. But most of the time, she would shift into a reptilian. Now, I always knew that these things existed, and I had seen them happen at Montauk, which I will talk about. And by the way, today I'm going to name a lot of names. I'm not naming her name right now because I don't know what she would do if she found out. I know who her targets are now in the future, and I have warned those people. I don't think they believe it, but they'll have to find out for themselves. I wish someone had warned me before she came into my life. But she is the worst of the worst. Those of you who read my book, Alien Connection, know about the section I have about the persona known as Johannes von Gruber. That persona actually is part of me. That person existed in Germany. This woman was his mistress in Germany. And when Johannes disappeared, she was executed. I can only imagine that the reason she was agreed to do this role now was retribution. She's driven. She will kill anybody. She will stop at nothing. She will let nothing get in her way. And I have to deal with that right now, and that's why I did not go to Denver to do global sciences, because she was going to be there. And I knew that if she was there, she could turn on her drugs or her programming, whatever it is she does, as my handler to make me snap back into that position again. And so for my own safety and for my family's safety, so not to be away from them again, I didn't go. And I warned Dean Stonier, who is the head of global sciences. He was warned. He says he understands and was doing his own investigation of this person. I don't know what happened, if she showed up or what even happened when she was there. I had other people who were friends of mine in California who actually went to see what was going on. I should get a report when I get home. And I just wanted to also apologize to all of you who I've been with before that I allowed this to happen to me when I should have known better and should have been mentally stronger and not allow that programming to come through again. Which leads me to tell you that never assume when you think you have undone something in a mind pattern or programming that it is done forever. The imprint will always be there as long as you're in this lifetime. You must always make conscientious efforts to monitor yourself and look for the triggers that can turn on the old patterns. And you will always be tested by yourself and others to see if you can fall back to those old patterns. And so, I never went back to Orlando, never communicated with the person again, although I know she did try to communicate with me on many different levels. I need to also tell you that she was in communication with not only Arizona Wilder, but also a person known as Cisco Wheeler, who you may have read about in the David Icke material. Cisco Wheeler claims officially to be an Illuminati programmer and also a keeper of information for them. Cisco Wheeler came to visit me in California, and she didn't like me because I didn't agree with some of the stuff she was saying. And she brought with her another gentleman who I won't name right now, who was involved with the Japanese government and the Japanese Illuminati. And this woman who was trying to control me wanted me to go to Japan and talk about the American public and what could be done with them. So, just to let you all know, I'm hopefully back on track now, and I will hopefully never allow any of this to ever happen to me again. But I wanted you to know what happened to me and why I haven't been back to Chicago in almost a year. And that is really, although I take full responsibility, it did have to do with the influence of this person in my life. Yes, sir.
That's your question. And to hope on the floor of this. In the last 6 months, have you given David Icke an interview concerning some things?
Yes, I have.
Because on the web.
Yes, it's been on the web for quite a while. I'm actually glad you brought that up. David Icke called me because he was interested in information involving the shape-shifting reptilians. There is a substance that these beings leave after they do this ceremony with their shape-shifting, which looks like gelatinous material, either the yellow or green slime. That's what it looks like. And he wanted to know what I knew about it, and I told him the information on that. I also told him that during the ceremonies at Montauk Point, when they did their reptilian ritual and ceremony, that I saw two people, one of whom looked like William F. Buckley, and the other one looked like Gardner, the one who wrote the book Holy Grail. Yeah, sorry? No, not Gerald Gardner. Sir Lawrence Gardner, right. Those two people, I saw people who looked like that shift into reptilian form as they performed blood ritual in the ceremony. And he was interested in that, and he was also interested in my DNA information and how someone could logically or scientifically shift, and I explained that to him. And unbeknownst to me, the entire conversation was being taped, and within 10 hours, it was on his website. Embellished a bit, but there it was, and there was nothing I could do about it. Okay? I recently contacted him to warn him about this woman because she's after him too. So I warned everyone I could possibly warn, and now it's up to them. It's like the analogy I gave you the last few times I was here, why even do any of this work now? And that is, if you see someone running towards a cliff with blindfolds on, what do? Do you let them go? Do you just yell at them? I prefer, what makes me comfortable is to physically stop the person, take off their blindfolds and show them the cliff. And then they can do whatever they want. If they want to keep running, they can keep running. But at least I told them there was a cliff there and I showed it to them. So that's what I'm going to do for you tonight, hopefully, is show you the cliff. Hopefully take your blindfold down, but you can put them back on afterwards if you wish. Okay? And I wanted to start out the lecture with this story about what happened to me because it will tie in again at the end when I talk about what the Illuminati plans are for this planet, which are quite heinous and are going on at this moment. It's no longer in the future. You're reading about some of it now in the newspaper. And it's going to get even more progressed as in the next few months and culminate within the next 3 years into a civilization that you didn't expect. Now, I've mentioned a lot of things in the last 45 minutes or so. I've mentioned about the Illuminati, I've mentioned about the reptilians, I've mentioned about Montauk Point, but I need to give you the history or the backup of all of this. And I need to explain to you also about the history of this galaxy, and particularly the solar system, because it's pertinent to what's going on now and will give you an understanding of why the reptilians have the mindset that they do. Now, there was a star system, and some of you may remember this from the DNA seminar that I had here about a year and a half ago. there was a star system at the center of this galaxy called Lyrae. You can consider Lyrae to be the home of all human civilization in this galaxy. And I mentioned to you that this civilization was very etheric. They were not really very physical, but borderline physical and non-physical. Now, the Lyrians, you can say, were descendant or the promulgation of what you would term angelic figures. As angelic energy descends into physical reality, it gets into a borderline state that the government refers to as ET level. And to refresh your memory, the government makes a distinction between ET and alien. An alien being is a physical being who resides within this physical universe but is not from the earth. And an ET or extraterrestrial is a borderline physical, non-physical being who comes from another dimensional space-time. Now the reptilians as I mentioned, were not from this galaxy. They appeared in a star system known as Draconis, or Draco. It's commonly referred to as Draco. Originally, I had told you that nobody knew who created them. It was a mystery. But now I can tell you, and I have told you just before, that they were created by what I call the clear people or transparent people. I have to use another pen because this doesn't have much ink in it. These clear people are the same category as extraterrestrial. They're not physical and not non-physical. They're kind of borderline. They have what I call a hive mentality. In other words, they exist in a sea of intelligence that is of the same genre of creatures they are. There's really no segregation or individuality. However, this sea of intelligence is very intelligent, and it has dissociated itself somewhat from what you would call God mind, or the universal, inter-universal energy that pervades all things, without which nothing else could exist. And in fact, if you want to judge them as evil or bad, I don't use terminology like that. I used to, but not anymore. Because I've come to learn that there really is no good or bad or evil or positive, negative. It's just intelligence. And everything is a flip side to the other thing. People ask me, do you believe in God? Yes, I believe in God. Nothing exists without it. And then people ask me, do I believe in religion? And I say no, because I know that all religions were created for mind control purposes. God does not have a religion. So when you ask me what religion am I say whatever God is. That's the religion I am. I believe, and I actually know this, but I'll say believe because I can't prove it to you, that these clear or transparent entities created the reptilians in order to destroy the civilization. They wanted to create their own little universe under their control. They wanted to be God. Now this woman that I told you about earlier, who was controlling me and handling me, claimed to be from them. And she told me that I was of them as well, and that we were the only two on the earth. And as incredible as this may sound, she almost proved it to me, or maybe she did prove it to me, because she showed me with my own vision, which, by the way, since I've been here last time, I have my eyesight back, that I could shift myself. And on several occasions, I actually shifted into a creature that looked like a winged lion, like the creature I told you about that I saw in Argentina. They were all along the Congressional building. This is what I saw myself become. And on one occasion, it was so powerful I couldn't shift back to human shape again. I can only imagine how this happened through her ritual and ceremony. She used to evoke a being, and maybe some of you have heard of this being, with this name. Abraxas. Have any of you heard of that before? He's heard of it. If any of you have information on this entity, I'd like to know it. The very first time I did my Illuminati lecture in Los Angeles, before she would let me go onto the stage, she evoked this being and let that being surround me.
The name of an album by Santana, if you remember, from the 70s.
I wasn't in the 70s. I was locked up in Montauk, so I really don't know very much about what the music was like. But I'd be glad to see that album cover.
There's a picture of the being.
What does it look like?
It looks like a winged lion, as I recall.
Is that right?
On the cover of the album.
Now that's pretty interesting. See, I learned something tonight. Now that's pretty interesting. And lion has always been a frequency which was important to me, which is why I have this and why I have this, the clinking jewelry, because that is a frequency that I connect with, and I even teach lion frequency to some of you. How many of you have I given lion frequency? Have any of you here? You, I've given, yeah. Not too many people, only those that I see associated with that. Well, anyone who can give me information on this, I would appreciate it. I don't know how far I can go as far as naming names, but I've had a lot of people helping me defend against this woman that I told you about. One of the people who is helping without naming names is a princess of, you think I can discuss that? Is the princess of the Montauk Indians. And she's been helping me with fighting against this evil person. She calls her an evil entity. She calls her from the depths of hell. Of course, she uses shamanic terms, and she uses procedures I don't necessarily agree with or understand, but yet she's helping me, and so I appreciate that help. Now, to finish this story, which is quite an intricate story, and I will use red because it's appropriate. When the reptilians attacked Lyrae, it destroyed that civilization. And in fact, I'll give you the float. I have a very complicated float chart here. I'll make it as easy as possible. The remnants of Lyrae spread out through the rest of the solar system, throughout the rest of the galaxy. They colonized such places as Tau Ceti, Procyon, Orion, Aldebaran, the Pleiades, Antares. Most of the known constellations and star systems in this galaxy were colonized by the Lyrians because their home area was destroyed. In this solar system, they colonized the planet Mars and another planet that no longer exists that was called Maldek. Maldek was a relatively large planet that existed between Mars and Jupiter. At that time, the Earth occupied the second orbit around the Sun, and it did not have an atmosphere like it has now. It was completely water-filled, both surface and atmosphere, not breathable. By the way, the Lyrians, when they became physical, had two forms. One was blonde hair, blue eyes, which was the standard form, and the other form was red hair and either blue or green eyes. Now the red hair person was considered very special and spiritual and also dangerous. They were extremely psychic and able to interact on many levels of communication and dimensionality. And they were very much used for priests and priestesses in Illyrian civilization. And in fact, they were used for breeding purposes because the genetics was so powerful. And in Montauk, most of the breeders were red-haired women with blue or green eyes. Now, the reptilians have a mindset that's very different than what humanity has. Reptilians believe that they are superior to all others. And as I mentioned at the bookstore last night, one of the reasons is they are androgynous. They have male and female in the same body. And since this is representative of what exists outside of physical reality, where there is no male or female gender, it's just energy, they consider themselves superior for bringing that type of information to physical reality. You'll also note, based on observing creatures on the earth right now, that reptilian forms do not evolve or adapt over eons or millions of years. They basically stay the same. And if there's a change, they just die out. Whereas mammalian forms need to adapt and evolve as there are changes occurring in their environment. So to the reptilian mind pattern, they're superior because they don't need to change or adapt. Therefore, they're completely perfect as they are. That's the mindset. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's just the way they think. And so they go after the Aryan types, or the blonde hair, red hair, blue eyes, green eyes, because the genetics of those people are easily controlled. The mind control over that genetic is very, very easy as compared to other races. This is why, in history, those who saw globalization or control of this planet wanted to promote the Aryan race as the natural form, because those who did this were being controlled by the reptilians. And they found every reason they could think of to make other civilizations or races look inferior. They manufactured that. And so, those who existed on Mars and Maldek were the blonde-haired, blue-eyed type, with a few of the red-haired, green-eyed types in there as well. Reptilians love to use comets and asteroids. That's their mode of travel and attack. They sent an ice comet into the solar system to destroy the human colonists or the Illyrian refugees on Mars and Maldek. Now, at the time, if I may erase this, at the time, the setup of this solar system was very different. Well, I'll use this. I'll use this as the sun. And then the planet Mercury was where it always was. Then there was the Earth, which, as I said, was a water planet, totally. Then there was Mars, which had an Earth-like atmosphere and environment. Then there was, I'm not an artist, but there was Maldek. Then there was Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. The comet was sent on a collision course to Mars. This comet was really a ball of ice, but under mechanical direction. However, because it didn't calculate it properly, as it got closer to this area, the gravitational pull of Jupiter, Maldek, and Mars threw this ice comet off course, and it got too close to Maldek, causing that planet to explode, creating an asteroid belt that still now exists between Mars and Jupiter. Those from Maldek who were able to leave before it exploded went to Mars as refugees. As the ice comet then approached close to Mars, it pulled the atmosphere off of Mars as it passed, literally ripped by gravitational pull the atmosphere of Mars, leaving a very thin atmosphere that exists to this day. And only now are they beginning to tell you that Mars was once covered in oceans and had an atmosphere. They're telling you all of this now. Now, the refugees of Mars went underground in Mars. There's a vast underground in Mars. And that's where they went. As the planet continued closer towards the Earth, this comet, it went into a revolving spin with the Earth. They rotated around one another, and the Earth flipped on its axis. The pull of the comet's gravitational field pulled the liquid atmosphere off of the Earth, and at the same time pulled the ice from the surface of the comet towards the Earth, kind of making a rotational spin. It ended up where most of the water covering of the Earth was polarized and frozen by the ice, creating the polar ice caps of Earth and causing landmass to rise above the surface. The comet then continued on and actually reversed places with the Earth, pushing the Earth out to the third orbit of the Sun, and the comet taking up the second orbit, and we now call that comet Venus. Venus was an ice comet. But because it is now so close to the Sun, the ice completely evaporated, creating a dense cloud cover around the planet that still exists. Now in 1982, I believe it was, a Soviet spacecraft penetrated the cloud layer of Venus and saw on the surface of Venus 7 domed areas lined up in a row. Just like that. Each several miles wide. It was photographed. It appeared on page 3 of most U.S. newspapers. Whole story about it. But at the very bottom, the last paragraph of the article, it said, NASA scientists believe that this is a natural formation. After they went through a whole page of saying how strange it was, and there were 7 domed objects, and they were lined up in a row, and what an anomaly this was, last paragraph was, scientists say it's a natural formation. Never heard a story again. I'm going to tell you, though, that these domes are biospheres for reptilian beings who live on the surface of Venus. Now, I want you to remember something that happened in the 1950s. I'm going to jump around in time. In the 1950s, there were these people who appeared on television and in the newspapers who claimed they were Venusians. Do you remember that? Those of you who are old enough, you don't have to say who you are. They claimed to be Venusians who came to Earth to uplift mankind. One of them actually wound up at the Pentagon. You remember his name? That's what he called himself, Val Thor. He claimed that he had a spaceship that landed in the Mojave Desert and that it was hidden and that he was a human type who had come from a civilization on Venus to help mankind, and that there are many like him on the planet. Now, just so that you know, the Illuminati like to present things as the opposite of what they are. What is Venus known as in mythology? Love. Okay? So if you're from Venus, what does that mean? You're full of love and peace, right? Okay? Now do the opposite of that. They're reptilian. Okay? They aren't capable of the emotion of love because they don't have that within them. They're androgynous beings. And so, Val Thor actually was taken to the Pentagon and supposedly exists there to this very day. And there are photographs of him. If you have newspapers from the 50s and early 60s, occasionally there would be a picture of Val Thor at a public gathering of public figures, and there he was. And they listed him as Val Thor. And that was in the newspaper. So, now let's go back in time. Earth was now colonizable because it now had land mass and the water was ripped out of the atmosphere, leaving an oxygen-rich environment. The reptilians drove another object into the solar system to colonize the Earth. We now call that object the moon. The moon is the only known object in space that's supposed to be natural that doesn't spin. It faces in one direction all the time, like a ship in orbit, and that's exactly what it is. If you send a sonic resonance off of the moon, it pings like a glass, hollow glass. It's not solid. If it were solid, the sonic resonance would make a thump or a bang sound. It doesn't. And in fact, to this very day, if you have a telescope, especially on a full moon, and you train your telescope at any crater in the moon, you will see activity there. You will see lights moving, you'll see vehicles moving, you will see buildings. You can do this if you have a telescope, and it doesn't have to be an expensive telescope either. And they colonized a continent. And there were two main continents at the time. A continent that is known as, or was known as, Lemuria, or in some civilizations they called it Mu. These were reptilian beings. This continent extended over the Pacific Basin. The remnants of it now are Australia and New Zealand, the South Pacific Islands, the Philippines, Japan, and Hawaiian Islands, as well as the coast of California west of the San Andreas Fault Line. That was Lemuria. And one of the plant life that still exists on this planet from Lemuria are the redwood trees. That is what was covering Lemuria. Have any of you ever walked through the redwood forest? It's a very strange sensation, very heavy feeling, but there's kind of an ancientness to it. And it only exists in that one little area by the coastline. Now, they existed on this continent, this vast continent, for many thousands of years before the human refugees who were originally from Lemuria, from Lyra, and now were underground in Mars, and they needed a place to go. In addition, not only were the Martians, Mars refugees, in need of a place to go, but there was a group of Lyrian refugees who had colonized one of the planets in the Pleiadian system, who called themselves the Atlans. Now, the Atlans were not very well liked. They were troublemakers. They were renegades. They wanted to recreate the Lyrian civilization under their own terms. You can think of them very much like the neo-Nazis in this country who want to recreate a new Germany. Well, think of Lyra as the old Germany and these Atlans being the neo-Nazis. They were not nice people. And so it was decided that the refugees who were the Atlans and those who were on Mars would be allowed to also colonize the Earth, because quite frankly, the human refugees wanted to get rid of them. And what better place to send them but a place filled with reptiles? But it was colonizable. So can you guess where these refugees went? They went to a continent that came to be known as Atlantis, named after the Atlans. Most of the colonists were Atlans. There were very few from here. A lot of them stayed here. because they wanted to see what would happen to the Atlans when they landed on a reptilian planet. And for a while, there really wasn't much going on between those two, because the full blast of the reptilian invasion force was not here. They simply wanted to get rid of the human colonists for a while. Understand that the reptilian mind, as far as the agenda of conquering, is insidious. They don't think like human beings. Where human beings want to attack a country, they'll attack and take it over. Not the reptilians. They have eons of time because they don't change, they don't evolve, they're always the same. So they just slowly move where they have to go, like cancer, till they finally get the whole thing. That's what they're like. Now, as I told you about, those of you who attended the DNA class, mammalian life forms or human life forms, mind pattern projects out animal and insect and plant life that is representative of the group mind pattern of the intelligent species. So a human form would project out mammalian life forms and associated plant life. What do you think an intelligent reptilian form would send out as animal-like creatures to occupy its world? Snakes, but in those days, dinosaurs. And there were many dinosaurs on the earth at that time. They were, for all intents and purposes, the domesticated animals of the reptilians. And that was a problem for the Atlanteans because these creatures were tremendously large. And they wouldn't keep their pets fenced up. Okay? So there was conflict between the two of them, and there were battles between the two of them. And the Martians, being so smart, waited for all of this because they were going to see what happened with the Atlanteans. Ultimately, Lemuria was attacked and sunk. The whole thing sank beneath the ocean, which we now know today as the Pacific Ocean. That left Atlantis as number one on the planet. And they started colonizing other areas as well. One of the places that they were looking to colonize was in what we now call Central Asia. But because they already had an entire continent to themselves, it was decided that the refugees from Maldek and Mars be allowed to colonize that area. And they colonized an area that we knew as Sumer, or the Sumerian civilization. It was colonized by the Martians. These were blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. If you put a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person in a deprivation tank where there is no external forces influencing the body, and all that's left is the natural biorhythm, the natural day for that person is 26 hours. That is the daytime length of the planet Mars. There's an exact match to blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, biorhythm, to the planet Mars. No other race has that category. Most other races on the earth have a 24-hour biorhythm. Well, at the same time, there was trouble going on in Atlantis as well, because there was infighting among all of these people, and there was also the influx of another civilization from the star system called Sirius A, which I spoke to you about in the last time I did a seminar here. Now, what do you think happened to the remnants of the reptilians after Lemuria sank? Anybody? Many of them, if not all that were left, went underground. They went inside the earth. And I mentioned this in the lecture last night at the library, and I'll repeat it for you here. The earth is hollow. All planets that are formed the way the earth was formed are hollow. When you have a molten piece of material ejected from a star, as that molten piece spins in space and cools off, the material inside pushes to the side. And as it pushes to the side, the gases that are formed are pushed out of the poles of this now circular object, creating openings where the gas has now been ejected. And what is left is trapped between two platelets, the molten lava, which is between the outer crust and the inner crust, and then the hollow space. Now the pressure created by this molten lava that's now trapped between these two crusts is ejected specifically at the 19th parallel. That's where the Hawaiian volcanoes are. If you look along the 19th parallel, most of the volcanoes are along that area, or within a couple of 100 miles of it. If you look at other planets, all of them have volcanic activity at the 19th parallel. The largest volcano in this solar system is in Mars at the 19th parallel. The red spot at Jupiter, 19th parallel. Moons of Neptune and Jupiter and Saturn have craters and volcanic eruptions at the 19th parallel. This is a scientific fact. This information was embedded in the geometry of the pyramids and monuments on Mars. If you take the trigonometry of the Martian pyramids and the face on Mars, and you do the math, it tells the story of the 19th parallel. And where do you find that replicated on Earth? At the Giza Plateau. The face on Mars is equal or equivalent to the face on the Sphinx. And what body does the Sphinx have? A lion. There's that lion again. And so, I have another flowchart to give you, which will show you what the reptilians did, because they don't give up, ever. They are insidious in what they do. They decided, now that they were inside the Earth, they were not on the moon anymore, they were cut off basically from the Draco star system. What are they going to do? They wanted to recapture the Earth in the best way possible, and the best way would be by genetic breeding, hybridization with the human beings on the planet. And here I need to give you another story. Those of you who are familiar with the Bible story of how creatures or Adam was created, the story of Adam. All of the Bible is symbolic. It is an allegory, not to be taken literally. And when there was a peace treaty at one point between the humans and the reptilians, the peace treaty was that they would try to create a new being which had the semblance or the mixture of all the genetics, not only of the reptilians and the Atlans, but of all the other civilizations in the galaxy that had an interest in the Earth. And this prototype was going to be called Adam, which in ancient Hebrew language means from the earth. And that's why in the Bible it says, let us make man in our image. God didn't say, I will make man in my image. Let us make man in our image, plural. And the story of the removal of the rib from Adam to create Eve, to create a female, is an allegorical story of using the foundational reptilian androgynous body and separating it into a male and female figure. That's an allegorical story of the separation into the sexes from a reptilian body. And so I'm going to give you a flow chart, and it might look a little bit messy, but it's the best I can do given the circumstances, of how the flow of civilization and reptilian DNA got into all of you. Because every single person on this planet, whether they're human or not, has reptilian DNA. And that's a unique situation in the galaxy. That's why there's such an interest in this planet from elsewhere, because nowhere else is there such a genetic mixture. And so, if we start out, and I'll try to make this as neat as possible, but I have to write small. If we start out with the Draco and the Lyrian civilizations, we find that there was a split here to Maldek and Mars on this side, and here was the Pleiades, or the Atlans, and this then went to Sumer, and this then went to Atlantis. And I'll do some work here so it won't be too confusing first. Here we have Venus and the moon. And then here we have Lemuria. So we're all on the same page with this so far. This is reptilian form, this is human form. Pure human form, which nobody on this planet is a pure human form. Now, from Atlantis, or from Mars, we have Sumer, and then Sumer led into Babylon. Now this is very important. Babylon is very important in the reptilian ritual and ceremony. The Babylonians spread out to become the Khazars in the Caucasus Mountain, and they in turn colonized Europe and the Middle East. Who then in turn colonized the Americas. Sumerian civilization actually led into the Phoenicians. They were the forerunners of the Egyptians, who, by the way, now this is where it gets complicated, the refugees from Atlantis also colonized Egypt. Okay, this is going to get a little messy now. I have an idea. I want to do the reptilians in red. Oh, let me finish this part. Then the Egyptians actually had an influence in Greece, and Greece actually became part of Rome and Spain, which led to the colonization of the Americas as well. Now, as far as the reptilians are concerned, once the Lemuria sank, they went underground, and I told you about the hybridization program. That began in Sumer. That was one of the first places that the human reptilian DNA mix for the shape-shifting reptilians began. And they also colonized India, China, and Japan. Now, in Sumer and Babylon, this is where the hybridization of the reptilians and the humans went into full force. It was here that they created a unique hybridization blend of 50% genetics reptilian, 50% genetics human. These then became what was known as the blue bloods. Who became the royalty of the earth. They call them blue bloods because their bloodstreams have a high copper content. When copper oxidizes, it turns blue or green color. When iron blood oxidizes, it turns red or brown. The Indian caste system is a direct replica of the Draconian or Lemurian hierarchy. They had different levels or species that would perform different tasks. They had a warrior caste, a spiritual caste, a worker caste, scientist caste. All of these levels were within the reptilian hierarchy and was recreated especially in India in the Hindu religion or the Indian civilization. And there are documents over 50,000 years old in India that talk about this exact event. And they also talk, and these are called the Vedas. And in fact, they also talk about a vehicle called a Vimana, which is a craft that can fly into the atmosphere or beyond the atmosphere and shoot lances that can disrupt the ground and create mushroom clouds, nuclear devices. This was written 50,000 years ago. And those were written from something else. They were copied from something else. But the newest ones are 50,000 years old. This area of the world right now is very, very important because the royalty of the earth call themselves the Illuminati. In Latin it means the enlightened ones or the illuminated ones. Officially, this group began in 1776, created in Bavaria by a man by the name of Adam Weishaupt. That's the official creation of the Illuminati. He put together this organization in Bavaria to pull together wealthy nobility and royalty to create a better world for the earth. Now that is an interesting date, 1776, because what else happened that year? Declaration of Independence and the creation of the United States of America, which, by the way, which I'll explain to you in a moment, is not even a country. And so, the Illuminati finally in 1776 decided to come out of the woodwork to make themselves known publicly, when in fact they existed from day zero. Really, they existed in their present form from the days of Sumer and Babylon. And they worshipped a pair of deities, a male and female. Male was called Nimrod. And the female was called Semiramis. In Egypt, these were changed to Osiris and Isis, but they were the same deity. Their symbol, I'm not the greatest artist, was the fleur-de-lis. Or the lily, symbolized by the lily flower, the three-pronged flower. And Nimrod, as the god in Sumer, was depicted with three horns. There are also sexual connotations to this because it's a very sexual religion. And he required blood sacrifice. Now, the disturbing thing is that in modern times, the same scenario was created in religion in the Middle East, only the same figure they used as Jesus and Mary. There's always male, female, male, female, male, female, one creating the other. There are statues in Sumer showing Semiramis with a human form, a reptilian face, reptilian claws and feet, holding a hybrid baby. That's what they worshipped in Sumer. You can see the picture in any magazine or book related to Sumerian civilization. But all religion from that point onward was based on this type of scenario. Can I erase this? Yes?
Yes.
I have a lot of information. I'm going to try to get through as much of it as I possibly can. I've only gone through this very first part of 3 pages that I needed to tell you about. Bless you, whoever it is. Now, I will tell you that the number 13 is very significant to the Illuminati, because in the last 500 years or so, also even last 1,000 years, there are 13 families that control this planet. 13 was also the number of colonies of the United States originally. 13 is also the age when the ancient Hebrews said that children become adults, what they call a bar mitzvah. And 13 is actually the true number of zodiac signs. One sign has been deleted for the past 1,000 years or more. And that sign was located between Scorpio and Sagittarius. And can you imagine what the symbol of that zodiac sign was? It was a dragon, a reptile. That's the 13th zodiac sign. 13 is significant. Do you want to know the names of these 13 families? I'm going to give it to you. But I need to tell you something else. 13 is at the top of the pyramid of families. Beneath them is called the Committee of 300. Those are 300 families who are descended from those original 13 who form the next level of their control pyramid. But the 13 are as follows. These are the families. Some of the names you will recognize, some you will not.
Is there significance to the order of the names?
No. These are the 13 families. These families control every minute detail of your life. Can you see it? Can you see that? Yeah. Some of them you can remember or recognize, some you may not be so familiar with. Where I have slashes, the Sinclairs are also spelled St. Clair. The Rothschilds were originally known as the Bowers. The Warburgs were originally known as Del Banco, hence the name bank or banking. The Windsors, the proper British family, actually are German and changed their name in World War I so that people wouldn't think that they were German. But their real name is Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. And same thing with Cavendish, whose sub-levels are called the Kennedys. Some of these people are in public power right now, and some are not. The Plantagenet family has its center in France, but also sent emissaries or colonies to Scotland and Ireland. Hanover, of course, is a big German city with that name. Everyone knows about the Rothschilds. This is a German derivation of Rothschild, which means the red shield, hence the Red Cross, which you see almost every day, which is also on the flag of Switzerland, which is also not a real country. The Krupps, oh yes, the Krupps, claim to fame, they built the ovens in the concentration camp and all of the machinations for the Nazi Empire. The de Medicis, you know, Italian family, very well known in banking. Romanovs, Russian royalty. My great uncle had the great distinction of having them assassinated in 1917. The Rockefellers, you know, were actually German. Kennedys, of course, you know, Cavendish, same thing. And the Habsburgs, who are the royalty of Austria. These families control everything in your life. Every single thing in your life.
You didn't make a comment about the Bruce.
Oh yes, the Bruce, one of the strongest families in Scotland. What movie was made about them? Braveheart. I happen to know one of their descendants who interviewed me for a book she's writing. Oh, and by the way, all of these are shape-shifting reptilians. Every single one of them. And do you remember a couple of years ago a claymation, no, it wasn't claymation, it was actually human beings dressed in puppets that did a show about being dinosaurs in the old times? Do you remember that show?
Yes.
And what was the name of that dinosaur family? The Sinclairs. Remember that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sinclair Oil.
Sinclair Oil. The gas station. What's on their gas station? A dinosaur. It's in front of your nose if you look at it.
So is that actually how they know about it?
They can shapeshift into reptilian form. They have a 50-50 split of human reptilian DNA. Most of you have more of a 90-10 split. You all have reptilian DNA. But once you approach this, you are a blue blood. You are royalty, the global elite, the rulers of the New World Order. And you shapeshift. And you need to do ceremony, including blood ritual and hormone intake of human beings in order to maintain a human form. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Anybody need to take a bathroom break? How about if we have a 10-minute break? Is that all right? Okay, and then I'll go more into this in the Committee of 300. and what's in store for the future.